Yo, what's up, everyone? First of all, shoutouts to another MVP for making a purchase from the Pocket Shop. I don't know who you are, but I appreciate your support for this channel. If you would like a shoutout, please email me your information at pocketsizedtales@gmail.com. And that also goes for anyone who makes a purchase from the Pocket Shop. In this story, I'm featuring another YouTuber for the first time. Her name is Bunnaw. She's going to be doing the voice for one of the characters. I've listed her information in the description, so please check her out. Her content is in Hmong. I originally had 2 endings for this story, and even took a poll on if y'all wanted a messed up ending, or a really messed up ending. Turns out y'all wanted a really messed up ending, so I hope y'all enjoy it. I also got the link in the description if anyone would like to get some merchandise from the Pocket Shop. Other than that, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and share my content with anyone you think would enjoy it. Thanks, everyone. It was the first day of deer season. With it being autumn in Wisconsin, there wasn't much to complain about, aside from a bit of cloud cover. But the weather was the least of Charlie's concerns. His mind was elsewhere. With his rifle over his shoulder, he trekked aimlessly through the forest. Charlie's friends and family made hunting an annual tradition. Like them, he'd always looked forward to it, but this time it was different. A lot has changed in the span of a few weeks. Lately, the only thing he wanted to do was curl up in a ball and cry, as if he were a child again. If it were possible to cry his problems away, he'd do it. Unfortunately, that wasn't an option. Charlie hadn't eaten in a few days, and his loved ones were starting to worry. They thought maybe a change in scenery would help, so they asked him to come along on the annual hunting trip. In reality, his loved ones didn't think it was a good idea for him to be alone. Although he didn't feel like it, Charlie went on the trip anyway for old time's sake. The only thing the tall, handsome 28-year-old enjoyed more than the outdoors was volleyball. What he wouldn't give to play in one more tournament, but it was such a long ways away. The next best thing he could do was go somewhere he'd never been. Maybe a visit to Jeju Island in Korea, or Mount Fuji in Japan. Perhaps both. They were just next door to each other after all. He could just do a tour of Asia, stopping in China and the southeastern countries as well. It wouldn't be a problem if money weren't an issue, and who would go with him? It wasn't like any of his friends or family could just take off work for a month. The man lamented not making an effort to travel more. Going to Minnesota could hardly be classified as traveling, especially if it were just running errands. Sadly, Charlie would have to make do with what he had. At least he still had his loved ones, which was the most important thing of all. A doe surprised the unattentive hunter when it wandered into his peripheral view from a distance and disappeared behind some brush. He froze for a moment, unsure what to do next. He wasn't even expecting an actual encounter with a deer or anything else besides birds or squirrels. He finally unslung the rifle from his shoulder. Quietly, he followed it into the brush. Every time he attempted to fix his sights on the beast, it disappeared, only to reappear elsewhere when the hunter brought down his rifle. On and on it went, like a game of cat and mouse. The hunter tracked it through the scope as it vanished behind a tree. Charlie set the crosshairs on the other side of it, expecting the deer to emerge from there. He fingered the trigger and licked his lips in anticipation, but his eyes widened as a young woman in a red dress stepped out where the crosshairs were. "What the?" Charlie whispered. The woman was extremely beautiful, with pale milk skin and long black silky hair. Around her forehead was an elegantly designed silver chain circlet. A tiny gemstone hung at the center of it atop the bridge of her nose. The silk dress she wore had oversized sleeves that hung loosely off her slender wrists. A sash wrapped around the waist of her lissom frame. Charlie stared unblinking at the mysterious young woman with his mouth agape. The man was so entranced by her presence he forgot where he was or what he was doing. Her looks could have rivaled any of the Chinese and Korean stars from the dramas he'd seen. She looked around as if checking to see if the coast was clear. The woman glanced directly in Charlie's direction, and he darted behind a tree, but not before catching the sly smile on her face. His face became flushed, and his heart drummed heavily against his ribcage. He pressed his back against the tree, holding his rifle tightly across his chest. Charlie closed his eyes, taking a few deep breaths to compose himself before taking a peek. The woman scurried in the opposite direction, her movements so graceful it was almost as if she were gliding. Curious, the hunter pursued her without a second thought. The longer he followed her, the faster she went. Before he knew it, the man was running to keep up with her. Somehow she was always able to maintain the distance between them, no matter how fast he ran. The winded hunter eventually gave up the chase. How could she have moved so quickly, he wondered. Had he frightened her? All the man wanted to do was get to know her and see if she was all right. She did look out of place after all. As fast as she was moving, he doubted he would have been able to catch her even without his pack and rifle. Charlie shouldered his gun and scanned the area, but she was nowhere to be seen. With the woman gone, he decided to turn back the way he came. He was so preoccupied chasing the woman in the red dress, he hadn't noticed how dark it had gotten. He felt like it had only been a few minutes, but the sun was already starting to set. Confused, the man pulled out his phone and glanced at it. The time was 4:03 p.m. This can't be possible, he said to himself. Sensing something was amiss with the approaching darkness, the panic-stricken hunter dug wildly in his pack for his headlamp. He found it and strapped the headlamp to his forehead, turning it on. He zipped the pack and threw it on his back as he hurried along. Couldn't believe what was happening before his eyes. As the hunter made his way back, the regrets gnawed at him. How could I have been so stupid, he thought. Charlie grabbed the two-way radio clinging to his side. He checked it for the proper channel, then turned it on, all the while maintaining a brisk walking pace. Just as he was about to contact his hunting party, the radio crackled, and the voice of a woman spoke in his native tongue. He stiffened. Charlie's heart sank into his stomach, and his blood turned to ice. A knot formed in his throat, and he swallowed hard. She asked again, but he didn't reply and just kept moving. He was almost jogging at that point. There was silence for a moment, when she spoke once again. The radio went silent, and Charlie took the opportunity to contact his companions. Can anyone hear me? He called over the radio, his voice cracking. Please respond, over. With the light from the headlamp guiding his way, Charlie quickly made his way through the dark forest, zigzagging around countless trees and pushing through copious amounts of vegetation, their leafy limbs whipping at him as he blew past. It was hard to tell exactly where he was with it being so dark. For all the man knew, he could have been going in circles, but he pressed onwards regardless. He tried several times to reach the others to no avail. The radio hissed, and the woman came back on. Charlie began to lose his nerves, but he refused to answer her, thinking if he did, she'd have some sort of power over him. He didn't remember where or when he heard the saying, but he desperately clung to the belief, hoping it would provide him with some sort of advantage. The hunter immediately switched off the walkie, but the laughing continued echoing around him. Go Yaling do! Who are you? Exclaimed the hunter, pointing his rifle frantically in every direction. Show yourself, he shouted, his gun still aimed wildly in circles. The woman materialized about 30 feet in front of him, except it was no longer a woman, but a pale-faced, gray, ghoulish being with a wicked grin, its red eyes fixed hungrily on Charlie. The being screeched and charged forth with amazing speed. It was so fast, it seemed like the ghoul was disappearing, then reappearing closer and closer with its every move. In a panic, Charlie let off several rounds, none of which hit their mark. The being was on him at once. In a blur, the ghoul slammed Charlie onto the ground, wrapping itself around him like a straitjacket, then sunk its razor-sharp fangs into the man's neck, puncturing the corroded artery. Warm, delicious liquid flowed into its mouth as it feasted itself into sustenance and ecstasy. Everything happened so fast. Charlie was dazed from his head hitting the ground. There was a pinch in his neck, then all the muscles in his body suddenly relaxed. He managed to let out a muffled, choking cry that trailed off into a whisper. A single tear rolled down his cheek as memories of his friends and family raced through his mind like snippets of different films pieced together. One scene was of Charlie as a boy running around a campground with his cousins. Another was a kiss with his first love as a teenager. Next was a scene of him as a young man, high-fiving and hugging his teammates in celebration after they took first place during a volleyball tournament. The final vision was of him as he was, in a hospital bed. His whole family hugged one another in tears after the doctor diagnosed him with a terminal illness. Charlie's eyes rolled back, and everything faded into darkness. The man's eyes slowly peeled open. He rubbed the fog from them and realized he was in a hospital room. He didn't know who he was or how he had gotten there. There was an IV line on his arm and an oxygen mask attached to his face, neither of them connected to anything. Unexpectedly, there were no other cables or tubes present. All the monitors and machines were turned off. It was quiet except for the foot traffic from the hallway. He sat up from his bed, but he couldn't focus. He felt nauseous. His world spun and shifted unevenly on the bed like a rider about to fall off his horse. The man couldn't explain it, but there was something very wrong with himself. The visions he saw didn't feel like his own. It was as if he was seeing them from the outside looking in, like a spectator at a movie. He couldn't make sense of it. Had it all been a dream, he wondered? And who was the mysterious woman in red? Suddenly, the man was afflicted with a crushing headache, accompanied by images of a dark, red-eyed beast bearing fangs and claws in his mind. He strained, grabbing his head with both hands, and gritted his teeth until the pain finally subsided. He was drenched in sweat when it was over. The man toppled from his bed, slamming onto the hard floor, the pain barely registering since he was so out of it. He ripped the oxygen mask off his face, then rose and stumbled drunkenly toward the bathroom. The overbearing wave of nausea ate at him, threatening to expel the bile from his empty stomach. Once in the bathroom, the man collapsed onto his knees and hung his head over the toilet bowl, retching and heaving, but nothing came out. With his throat parched, his body weak and violently trembling, he desperately needed to find some way to cool the great hunger raging inside of him. Something caught his eye as he stared into the water, or rather it was something he didn't see that caught his attention. He looked into the mirror, turning his face from side to side as if it would make a difference. It did not. The man's reflection was gone. He growled and punched the reflectionless mirror, cracking it into a web-like pattern as it confirmed his suspicions that something was terribly wrong. He glanced at his hand. There was hardly a scratch on it. Overwhelmed with emotion, the man sat himself by the sink with his back against the wall. He hugged his knees and began to cry. The door to his room opened, and his head instinctively perked up like a predator catching scent of its prey in the wind. The man sniffed the air. There were two of them, a male and a female. Their beating hearts and the smell of blood running through their veins triggered his primal instincts. Like a stalking lion, he quietly got on all fours. He honed in on their location, preparing to pounce when they were within range. The door closed behind them, and their footsteps ascended further into the room, bringing them ever closer to the ambush. "My son!" the woman began, sobbing hysterically. "Where did they take him?" A set of footsteps walked around the bed and stopped directly in front of the bathroom. Time slowed as the elderly man came upon his son, Charlie, or what used to be him. In that moment, all he saw was a crazed beast with fiery red eyes, bearing fangs and claws. The sight of it was so terrifying, the old man froze wide-eyed where he stood. The beast backhanded the old man in the face, knocking out teeth and shattering bones. The blow sent the old man flying across the room, careening into the far wall. He bounced off of it and onto the floor behind the bed, laying there motionless. The old lady watched helplessly as the attack unfolded, By the time she caught sight of the beast, it was too late. For a split second, she saw the face of her beloved son. Before he mauled and clamped his teeth down on her throat, she mouthed the words, "I love you." In her arms was a pair of dress shoes and clothes she'd brought for him, ruined in a coat of crimson. The old woman's body went limp, and the clothes fell to the floor, with the continuous sound of snarling and slurping, spattering even more blood on them. In the Hmong religion, it is believed the dead would need proper apparel for their journey to the afterlife. The couple came back with their son's clothes, but it looks like he won't be needing them after all. That's it for this episode. Remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. The link is in the description if you'd like to make any purchases from the Pocket Shop. Thanks for listening.